door, and I must say, I thought it pretty poor-spirited of Mr. Astley not to have turned her out of the house, because he told me she never came to stay with them but to make trouble. And as for young Grittleton—" She broke off with a gurgle of laughter. The things he said about him, Sarah, I couldn't but laugh, and the odious creature's intentions were most honourable. He made me an offer. Well, that, of course, was what threw Mrs. Grittleton into such a pelter, for try as I would, I couldn't make her believe that nothing could prevail upon me to marry her detestable son. She ranted like an archwife and scolded poor Mrs. Astley into such a pucker that she fell into strong convulsions and miscarried. So Mr. Astley saw nothing for it but to send me away. Well, I own he behaved very handsomely, for he paid me for the whole year, not merely the 6 months I had truly earned, and sent me to the coach stop in his own carriage, but considering he told me himself that he held me blameless, I can't but think it was very poor-spirited of him not to have sent Mrs. Grittleton packing instead of me. Poor-spirited? Ejaculated Mrs. Nidd, removing the lid from one of the pots on the fire and viciously stirring its contents. Aye, and so you may, and so they are, all of them. Anything for peace and quiet, that's men. She replaced the lid on the pot and turned to look down at her nursling, trouble in her face. I'm not saying you should have accepted that young Grittleton's offer, but, oh, dearie me, what's to be done now? Well, I must find myself another situation, of course, responded Kate. I mean to visit the registry office, this very day, only— She paused, eyeing Mrs. Nidd uncertainly. Only what? Demanded that lady. Well, I have been thinking, Sarah, and although I know you won't agree with me, I believe I should be very well advised to seek a situation in a domestic capacity. Well, never while I'm alive, said Mrs. Nidd. The Lord knows it went against the pluck with me when you hired yourself out as a governess, but at least it was genteel. But if you're thinking of going out as a cookmaid or— I shouldn't think anyone who wasn't all about in her head would hire me, interrupted Kate, laughing. Well, you know I can't bake an egg without burning it. No, I believe I might do very well, or at any rate tolerably well, as an Abigail. In fact, I dare say I could rise to be a dresser. And then, you know, I should be a person of huge consequence, besides making my fortune. Mrs. Astley's housekeeper has a cousin who is dresser to a lady of fashion, and you wouldn't believe how plump in the pocket she is. No, I wouldn't, retorted Mrs. Nidd. And even if I did— But it is perfectly true, insisted Kate. For one thing, a first-rate dresser commands a far bigger wage than a mere governess, besides being a person of very much more consequence. Unless, of course, the governess should be excessively well educated and able to instruct her charges in all the genteel accomplishments. And even then, you know, nobody slides sovereigns or bills into her hand to win her favour. Well, upon my word, uttered Mrs. Nidd, explosively. Kate's eyes danced. Yes, isn't it shocking? But beggars can't be choosers, and I've made up my mind to it, that to make my fortune, or at any rate to win an independence, is of more importance than to preserve my gentility. No, listen, Sarah. You must know that I have no accomplishments. I can't speak Italian or play the piano, far less the harp, and even if people wish their children to be instructed in Spanish, which they don't, I don't think they would wish them to learn soldiers' Spanish, which is all I know. On the other hand, I can sew and make and dress a head to admiration, and I did so once for Mrs. Astley when she was going to a ball, and her woman had made a perfect botch of her hair, so— No, said Mrs. Nidd, in a tone which brooked no argument. Now drink your tea and eat your nice bread and butter, and no more nonsense. Oh, if ever I listened to such a pack of skimple scamble stuff. And I don't want to hear any more about imposing on me and Nidd, for there's no question of that, and I take it unkindly of you to say such a thing, Miss Kate. Kate caught her hand and nursed it to her cheek. No, Sarah, well, you know better. How infamous it would be if I were to foist myself onto you. When I think of all you have done with old Mr. Nidd living here and all those grandsons of his to feed and house, I feel it's quite shameless of me to come to you, even for a short visit. I couldn't stay here forever, dearest Sarah. You must own I could not. No, you couldn't, acknowledged Mrs. Nidd. It wouldn't be fitting. Not but what there's only 3 grandsons, and one of them lives with his ma. That's Jo's sister, Maggie, the most gormless creature you ever did see. Still, there's no harm in her, and I'm bound to say she's always ready to come and lend me a bit of help, if help you can call it. But a carrier's yard is no place for you, dearie, and well do I know it. We'll think of something, never you fear. I have thought of something, murmured Kate wickedly. No, you haven't, Miss Kate. You're puckered with that nasty stagecoach and all the uproar that was kicked up by that Mrs. Brimstone or whatever she calls herself, and you'll feel different when I've got you tucked into bed, which I'm going to do minute you drunk up your tea. You'll have your sleep out, and when you wake up, you shall have your dinner in the parlour upstairs, and we'll see what's to be done. Kate sighed. Oh, I am very tired, she confessed. But I shall be happy to eat my dinner downstairs with the rest of you. I don't wish— An ox cheek with dumplings, interrupted Mrs. Nidd. I dare say, but it ain't what I wish, Miss Kate, and nor it isn't what Nidd or the boys would wish neither, for to be sitting down to their dinner in company with a young lady like yourself would put them into such a stew, minding their manners and that, and would turn them clean against their victuals. So you'll just do as Sarah tells you, dearie, and— Believe that Sarah knows best, supplied Kate, submitting. Which you can be bound I do, said Mrs. Nidd. Miss Malvern was neither so young nor so guileless as her flower-like countenance frequently led strangers to suppose. She was 24 years old, and her life had not been passed in a sheltered schoolroom. The sole offspring of a clandestine marriage between the charming but sadly unsatisfactory scion of a distinguished family and a romantic girl of great beauty but somewhat inferior lineage, she was born in a garrison town and reared in a succession of lodgings and billets. The runaway bride, whom Captain Malvern had captivated, disappointed her scandalised relations by suffering no regret whatsoever at being repudiated by them, and falsified their expectations by remaining so ridiculously besotted that neither the discomforts of following the drum nor the aberrations of her volatile spouse abated her love or daunted her spirits. She brought Kate up in the belief that Papa was the personification of every virtue. The embarrassing situations in which from time to time he found himself arising not from any obliquity but from an excess of amiability, and that it was the duty of his wife and daughter to cherish him. She died in Portugal when Kate was 12 years old, almost with her last breath adjuring Kate to take good care of Papa, and to the best of her ability Kate had done so, aided and abetted by her redoubtable nurse. Sarah cherished no illusions, but, like nearly all who were acquainted with him, she was a victim of his compelling charm. Poor dear gentleman, Sarah had said after his funeral. He had his faults like the best of us. Not that I'm saying he was the best, because telling faradiddles is what I don't hold with, and there's a few knows better than me that you couldn't depend on him, not for a moment, while as for the way he wasted his money, it used to put me into such a tweak that there were times when I didn't know how to keep my tongue between my teeth. He never took thought to the morrow, and nor did my poor dear mistress neither. You never knew where you was, for there wouldn't be enough money to buy one scraggy chicken in the market one day, and the next he'd come in singing out that the dibs was in tune, and not a thought in his head or my mistress's but how to spend it quickest. Well, he told me once that it was no use ringing a peal over him for going to low gaming houses because he was born with a spring in his elbow. And there was no sport in playing cards and such in the regiment, for nearly all the officers was living on their pay, same as he was himself. But this I will say for him, there was never a sweeter-tempered nor a kinder-hearted man alive. Aye, had agreed Mr. Nidd, rather doubtfully, though it don't seem to me as he behaved very kind to Miss Kate, leaving her like he done with a lot of debts to pay, and none but his prize money to do it with. What was left of it, which by what you told me wasn't so very much neither. He always thought he'd win a fortune. And how was he to know that he was going to meet his end like he has? Oh, Joe, I wish he'd been killed at Waterloo, for this is worse than anything. When I think of him, that was always so gay, and up to the knocker, no matter whether he was plump in the pocket or regularly in the basket, being knocked down by a common tax cart. Well, it makes me thankful my poor mistress ain't alive to see it, which is a thing I never thought to be, and my lamb left alone without a sixpence to scratch with, and she so devoted to her pa. I never ought to have married you, Joe, and it weighs on me that I let you wheedle me into it, for if ever Miss Kate needed me, she needs me now. I need you too, Sarah, had said Mr. Nidd, with difficulty. Observing the look of anxiety on his face, Sarah had mopped her eyes and implanted a smacking kiss on his cheek, saying, And a good kind husband you are, Joe, and if there was more as faithful as what you proved yourself to be, the world would be a better place. Colouring darkly, Mr. Nidd had uttered an inarticulate protest, but this rare tribute from his sharp-tongued spouse had been well earned. Falling deeply in love with a much younger Sarah, who had been on the eve of accompanying her mistress and her nursling to Portugal, and had rejected his offer, he had indeed remained faithful. 7 years later, just like Jacob, had said Kate, urging her nurse to the altar, when Sarah had come back to England with her widowed master and his daughter, he had renewed his suit, and his constancy had been rewarded. Miss Sarah Publow had changed her name to Nidd, and had lost no time at all in assuming the control of her husband's family and vastly improving their fortunes. Within a year, she had bullied and cajoled her aged father-in-law into spending his jealously hoarded savings on the acquisition of the inn, which now provided the firm with spacious headquarters, and had transformed it from a single carrier into an establishment which, if it did not yet rival Pickford's, was in a fair way to providing Pickford's with some healthy competition. Her husband adored her. His father, while losing no opportunity to get the better of her, had been known to inform his cronies at the Cock, when mellowed by a sufficient quantity of what he inelegantly termed belly juice, that she was a sure card. His sisters wavered between ineffective resentment of her managing disposition and a comfortable dependence on her willingness to assist them in any difficulty, and his nephews, all as inarticulate as he was himself, said simply that you wouldn't get a more bang-up dinner anywhere than what Aunt Sarah would give you. Even Miss Malvern, for all her 24 years, turned instinctively to her in times of trouble, and was insensibly reassured by her air of competence. Tucked now into bed, told that there was no need to get into high fidgets, and adjured to go to sleep, she thought, snuggling into the feathered softness, that perhaps she had allowed herself to become too despondent, and that Sarah really did know best. But Sarah, stumping downstairs again to the kitchen, was feeling far from competent, and although the dinner she presently set before her husband, her father-in-law, one of her nephews, and 2 of the lads employed in the stables, in no way betrayed her inward perturbation, she ate very little of her own portion, and was a trifle short in her responses to the remarks addressed to her. This circumstance did not escape the notice of Mr. Nidd Senior, or Mr. Nidd Junior, but when the younger Nidd, a simple-minded soul, began anxiously to ask if anything were amiss, his more astute sire cut him short, adjuring him not to be a jobbernoll, and inquiring affably of Sarah if it wasn't Miss Kate he'd seen crossing the yard a while back. "Which I hopes it was," he said, mopping up the gravy on his plate with a large lump of bread. "For she's been first doors with me from the moment I clapped eyes on her. She's heartily welcome. A prettier girl I never did see, and nothing niffy-naffy about her. Sweet as a nut she is, but for all she don't hold up her nose at folks like us, she's a proper lady. And don't you forget it, young Ted," he concluded, rounding suddenly on his grandson, with such ferocity that the hapless youth dropped his knife. "If you was to behave disrespectful to her, I'd lay your back open." Such was the awe in which his descendants held him that young Ted, a brawny giant, saw nothing absurd in this threat, but informed him in stammering haste that nothing was further from his intentions than to treat Miss Kate with disrespect. He accepted this assurance, but caused the 2 hirelings to quake by saying, "And as for you, you'll keep out of her way, couple of clod-crushers." At this point Sarah intervened, telling her father-in-law that there was no call for him to rake the poor lads down, and providing them with generous portions of apple pie. She spoke sharply, but was not unappreciative of the tribute he had paid her darling, and when the younger members of the party had withdrawn, and Mr. Nidd had bade her empty her budget, she said in a much milder tone, "Well, I don't mean to fall in the dismals, but I am in a worry, father. Oh, that